All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to the build. As you can see, the the SLC is in a little bit of a disarray, or a state of disarray, I may say. But anyway, in this video, we are going to cover welding up and finishing the cooling tube, so stay tuned. All right, so let's sort of cover what we're going to do. I originally wasn't planning on videotaping any of this, but one of the viewers asked me if I was going to videotape some welding. Now, I've been learning how to weld. I bought this machine last fall, and I was planning on welding up the bottom closeout panel on the chassis, but I sort of lost my nerve. I wasn't good enough. It takes an expert welder to do that type of welding, and candidly, it's just impossible to get anybody to come to your house to do that type of work. So I wound up screwing that in, as I covered in a previous video. But anyway, this is a little more of a manageable task for a beginner. So these are stainless steel tubes, and I've got to weld all these together. And some of these I had welded by the individual who does my welding, but in this case I couldn't bring the tubes to him perfectly aligned. I'd have to tack weld them on the car. So if you have to tack weld them, you need a tack welder. So I figured, let me just learn how to weld. So anyway, here's really the deal. So I did a lot of practicing on aluminum, but this is about the amount of practicing I did for stainless steel. And I basically just cut like in sections and practiced going around the tube. And eventually, I felt like I had enough technique, and I welded up my first two tubes. So this was the first one. Not bad. A little clumpy, but not burnt. A lot of times you burn the stainless steel. And then this is the last one I did, and this one came out even better. So anyway, that's sort of what the process is. So I'm going to weld up a bunch of these things, and let's talk a little bit about the equipment. So I got this Prime Weld TIG AC/DC welder, which is a really nice machine. I've got something called a dual argon regulator, because you have to send this shielding gas and to back purge through the tube, so the inside of the tube is just as shiny as the outside. Otherwise, it crusts up, and you could have a weak weld or a weak seam. So anyway, I do sort of this back purge, and then I position, and I do maybe about a half an inch or an inch at a time. And that sort of does the trick. All right, I'm going to try to get a little welding on camera. We'll see how it goes. All right, so stay tuned. Okay, well, the first step is you got to make sure your parts are clean. So basically, I'm going to weld these two ends up. Hard to tell, but the ends are a little shinier. I wipe them down with some acetone, and then I take a small stainless steel brush, like a Harbor Freight brush on a moto tool, and then I wipe it down again with acetone, and you can see a good amount of crud sort of came off the parts. And I do both the outside and the inside. Then what I'm going to do is, because I want to make these sort of perpendicular, I use a big piece of angle, and I'll use a clamp these in place, and then I'll tack weld them. I'll try to get this on the video, okay? All right, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get any shots of me welding. It's hard to sort of mount this camera in an area that works. But anyway, use a simple clamp. Make sure this is on the bottom. This goes, right in there, and it lays there nice and flat. And you can tell this is at the right angle because there's really like no gaps. And you could use a plastic thing while you tack weld it up. It doesn't get very hot. You could just hold the pipe in your hands and tack weld it. So Anyway, we're going to tack these up, then we'll take a look at them. Okay, well, we're done tacking it up. Figured I'd show this. So I do 4 on each one. You can see, these tubes just butt up right against each other. That makes welding a lot easier. So I'm going to put the back purge plugs in, and we'll take a look at that, and then I'll weld it up. So we're looking at the tube, the two elbows that are tack welded up, and then I have the back purge setup installed. So you see here on the right side, basically you have a silicone plug, and then I have a 1/4 inch vinyl line with the brass fitting, and that will feed the argon into the tube. And then on the other side I have a similar plug, and I actually scavenged a sintered vent from one of the expansion tanks, and it basically will push argon, which is heavier than air, into this tube. Eventually it pushes all the air out. So I'll run it for a minute or two, and then when you start to weld, basically the inside comes out as shiny as the outside, and it looks really good. And the way we set it up on the tank, you can see the 2 regulators. So the one on the right side feeds the torch, and then the one on the left side, I'll set it to about 10 CFM or CFH, excuse me, and we'll start back purging, then we'll weld it up. Okay, so stay tuned. Okay, well, there she is, hot off the press, literally. Don't want to touch it, but look, it works out good. I got these little inexpensive silicone plugs and a couple cheap fittings from Home Depot, and I got myself a back purge setup. That came out pretty good, and this is the third set of tubes that I've welded together, so I'm feeling more and more comfortable about it. I will tell you though, my left hand shakes a bit, so if you got shaky hands, TIG welding, it may or may not be for you. It's definitely a little bit of a challenge for me, but these results are certainly good enough. All right, we got a good video of some of the inside of the tube, so you can see the weld is nice and shiny in there. So that's the back purging. Otherwise it would be all dark and crusty, and apparently that can cause a failure. This is the outside. There's a couple spots I may sort of touch up with the TIG torch on something called the pulse setting, but all right, 3 down, about 20 more to go. We'll probably do a few more segments. There are a couple other things I'd like to show you, so stay tuned. Okay, well, I think this is worth showing. So let's see, these are the front tubes, so moving over to them, and like I mentioned, I had the professional welder weld up some of these tubes, but they were all just sort of straight welds, so nothing needed to be aligned. But in this case, I need to align this front tube with the rear part of the front tube, and I made a little bit of a splint or a pipe clamp out of a couple silicone tube clamps and a couple pieces of aluminum. So you can see the pipe clamp there, and we'll sort of zoom in. But anyway, this is sort of nice. Cost me a few bucks, and it holds this nice and steady at a certain angle and keeps the gap closed. And then I'm going to just sort of tack these up and continue on. Okay, well, 3 years into the build, and I'm happy to report I've got one cooling tube section completely done. So we welded up that area that we had the splint on. I'll highlight it there. So it came out pretty good. So this is my first cooling tube that's completed. You can see I use a silicone joining tube where that white piece of PVC is to connect the lower radiator hose, and it sort of snakes around, and then it will connect to the side tube with another silicone hose. And I put these silicone hoses in locations that are easily serviceable. Let's see, we'll take a look over here. This tube's just about done. I've got one more section to do. I've got to tack up the extension that brings the cooling tube to the top of the radiator, and you can see I've got another one of these clamps there that hold that pipe in place. And these 45-degree angles are not totally flat, so they're on specific angles to get everything to line up. So they're a little tricky, but anyway, once I weld up that tube, then I got the front tubes down, and then I'll move over to the center tubes. Okay, well, you have all the tubes welded up. The last step is I've got to weld a bung for the liquid to oil cooler that comes on the LT4. And to do that, I just need to center this. And this is a tip I got on YouTube from the fabrication series. So you just find a bolt with the same hole that centers the bung on the pipe, and you're ready to tack weld it. So anyway, we're going to weld this up, and then we'll take a look at all the cooling tubes. All right, well, just when you think you've become an expert welder, a disaster strikes. So I got all the tubes done, and I tried to weld this bung on, and I really was excited to get it done. And the weld looks totally sloppy and sort of crummy. B, I put that cap in as the bung was cooling, and I felt it tighten up, and it turned out it seized. So I can't even get that cap off. So I ordered a couple more elbows and a few more bungs, and I took a little more time fitting the bung onto the pipe. The bung is made for an exhaust tube, and I got that with no gaps now. That'll make it easier. But I'm going to weld up just the bung on this tube. If it comes out good, then I'll just sort of splice it in here, and then we'll be done, and we'll take a look at all the tubes. Okay, here's a better video of the fit. Fitting the parts up is very important. So I got that sort of nailed. So hopefully I can focus and get the heat in the right place and finish this up. Whoa, there we go. All right, well, this is number 2. This came out okay. I'm not 100% happy with this. Anyway, what I figured out is I'm just not using enough heat on the part. So I cranked the amps up, and I did another one, and this one was actually acceptable. Whoop, there we go. A little, certainly a heavy bead. If you were a professional welder, it would be less, but I could smooth that out a little bit. But I've got one issue. You just can't make this stuff up. Anyway, look at this. There's no thread in this particular bung. So I got I got 5 bungs for $12, and then the one I pull out of the bag wasn't machined inside. So anyway, I've got 2 of these left. So the next one I make, I've got to hit a home run on that one, all right? So stay tuned. Okay, well, we're finally done with the cooling tubes. I would estimate I had at least 100 hours of work into these. I actually didn't even cover, but I had about 4 sections that I had steel that I didn't like. A couple of them, 3 of them were the end pieces with the beads, and there were sort of seams and gashes in them, and they were actually highly metallic, which means to me they were a lower grade of stainless steel. So I cut those sections out. I wound up making the bung 4 times. I learned how to weld. But building a kit car, it sort of pushes you to your limits from a talent standpoint. And I will say I really enjoy machining, but I find welding a bit on the stressful side. It's like you spend all this time getting these parts perfect, and then and then you hit a little too much amperage, or your hand shakes, and your part dissolves in front of your eyes. But anyway, let's fit these on the car, and then we'll call it a wrap. Okay, well, this will be the last segment of the video. I'll do a quick walk around of the cooling tubes installed, and then we will call it a wrap. So this is, I haven't shown this before. It's sort of hard. It's black on black on black, but I've got a couple silicone hose ends. Basically That's where the water comes out of the engine, and then it comes down, and there's actually that bung. That bung wound up coming out pretty good after the 4th time. But anyway, the water comes down, and these pipes sort of tuck in against the closeout panel near the fuel tank. It gives me access to the belt, so if I need to change the serpentine belts, I don't need to move them out of the way. Then I've got that silicone hose, and it travels through the body and then out the front, and then I'll have a joiner, right around there. So, in this design, I can get these side tubes out if I need to, and then the front and the rear tubes are removable just in case I need to change the design. And then this one, it was a little tricky. It actually had to come up and line up with the top, with the top of the radiator. I counted up all the pieces. I had 40 sections. 40 sections. I probably welded, probably about close to 50 sections. And then this one over here just connects to the lower radiator hose. There you go. You can see that. And then it's sort of a mirror image on the other side. This one comes up higher because it needed to clear the hole coming through the fuel tank for the shifter cables. And also it clears the supercharger belt tensioner. So anyway, that's sort of a wrap on the cooling tubes. In the next video, I think we're going to install the transmission, so we're slowly getting closer and closer to go-kart. All right, so thanks for watching, and take care.